All right, this is Unit 5, Lesson 1. So you should be starting a fresh page in your notebook. Our goal today is to be able to find the hypotenuse given two legs, and we're going to do that by using the Pythagorean theorem. Start your notes at the top with your do now, find the answer to the following question, and explain your thinking and how you approached it. You should set up your notes with two columns. On the left-hand side is the question, on the right-hand side is your answer. We'll keep that same layout when we move into our notes for today. So today our focus is finding the hypotenuse. In our two column notes, first we will start by writing the steps for finding the hypotenuse on the right hand side and copying this diagram on the left hand side of a right triangle. So all of these four steps for finding the hypotenuse should be in your notes. Identify the length of the legs, substitute those legs into the Pythagorean theorem, square both my numbers for a and b, add them together, and then take the square root. In your diagram, I should have two legs. The legs of a right triangle are the sides that create that 90-degree angle in the corner. Make sure you draw the box in the corner that shows that it's a 90-degree angle. My legs are always labeled A and B. It doesn't matter which leg is A, which leg is B. Those are the values that we'll use for the Pythagorean theorem. The hypotenuse is always the longest side. It's always on the opposite side of the 90-degree angle. If you imagine that box, the corner of that box in the 90-degree angle is an arrow pointing straight at the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse will always be C. And so make sure you've labeled your legs and your hypotenuse A, B, and C. We'll use values for those variables in our Pythagorean theorem in the next question. So question number 1 asks, a right triangle has a leg that measures 3 centimeters and another leg that measures 4 centimeters. We're going to determine the length of the hypotenuse, and first we're going to label our triangle. So under the steps that we just wrote, we will have number 1 in our notes, 2 columns. On the left-hand side will be the question, and on the right-hand side will be the steps. What the question told me was that one leg is 3 centimeters, another leg is 4 centimeters, and they want me to find the hypotenuse. First, I need to label my triangle. Again, the hypotenuse is always on the opposite side of the 90-degree angle. So there's my right angle, 90 degrees. And so if I imagine it as an arrow pointing to the hypotenuse from the corner, my hypotenuse is here, and that will be C. So when they ask me to find my hypotenuse, here it is. We don't know what it is. And then I have the lengths of my two legs. The legs are the other sides that make that 90-degree angle. So I have one leg and another. Leg, leg. It doesn't matter which one I assign the value of 3 and which I assign the value of 4. I'm sure one of them is actually the 3 centimeter long side and one is the 4 centimeter long side. When using the Pythagorean theorem, we can interchange A and B, so we won't worry about it too much. We have 3 centimeters and 4 centimeters for my two legs. My legs should also be labeled A and B. I can switch A and B if I want to as well. Because if you remember our first step is to identify the legs. So now that we've labeled our triangle, we see that my legs, A and B, are 4 and 3. And C is what we still don't know, our hypotenuse. Step 2 is to substitute those numbers into the Pythagorean theorem. My Pythagorean theorem states that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So when I substitute my values for A and for B, I get 4 squared plus 3 squared equals C squared. C is still what I'm trying to find. So now we need to square both of those numbers, either in a calculator or by hand, and then I need to add them together. So 4 squared would be the same as 4 times 4, the exponent of 2 indicating how many 4s I'm multiplying together. So I have 4 times 4 plus 3 times 3 is going to be equal to C squared. That is 16 plus 9. And 16 plus 9 is 25. So we're not done yet. That's C squared, which makes sense because 25 is far too long to connect these two sides that are only 4 centimeters and 3 centimeters. So remember that C squared means it's C times C. So I'm thinking about what number multiplied with itself could give me 25. And so if I don't know the answer to that question, the operation that will find that number for me is the square root. So remember step number 4 from our notes is to take the square root. So the square root of 25 will be C. That's the opposite operation of squared. So now that I'm trying to get C by itself, I should do the opposite operation. The opposite operation of squared is the square root. If I type that into my calculator, the square root of 25 is 5. And that is C. So my final value for C is 5. I am measuring in this problem with centimeters, so 5 centimeters. And that is my final answer. Remember that the answer to a square root could be positive or negative. Here with our right triangles, we're talking about distance, so we won't use a negative value for C. We'll always opt for the positive answer. We'll try one more. Example 2 says that a right triangle has a leg that is 14 inches and another leg that is 12 inches. So we're going to, again, determine the length of the hypotenuse and we're going to label our triangle. In my notes, this is question number 2. Again, which information did they give me? That one leg is 12 inches, the other leg is 14 inches, and we want to find the hypotenuse. On the right-hand column in our notes, we will write the steps we're taking. So first, though, we will label our triangle. Let me first look at the 90-degree angle here. Again, if the corner of it is pointing out, the side that is opposite the 90-degree angle is the hypotenuse. So that should be C, the hypotenuse. That's what we're looking for. We don't know the hypotenuse right now. So my other two sides are the legs, the two sides that make up the 90-degree angle. So I have a leg and a leg. My two legs are 12 and 14. Again, for this situation, it doesn't matter which I label which. This looks like the smaller one, 12 inches and maybe 14 inches. And they are A and B. Again, that doesn't matter either. A, B. So if my first step is to identify the legs, step number 1, I'll note that A is 14, B is 12, and C is what we don't know. So I'm going to substitute those values into the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So if I replace the variable A with 14 and B with the variable or with the value of 12, I'll get 14 squared plus 12 squared equals C squared. Now I'll evaluate that. 14 squared is 14 times 14, which is 196. 12 times 12 is 144, and that will be equal to C squared. 196 plus 144 is 340. Again, that means that I'm looking for a number that multiply with itself gives me 340. That might be a little bit harder for us to find by hand or in our head. So if we use our calculator, we'll take the square root of 340 to find C. If I round it to the nearest tenth, that is 18.4. So that means that my final side is 18.4, and we're measuring in this problem in inches. At the bottom of your notes, be sure that you're asking one question about the activity from today. One example is, what if we were to know C but not know A or B? Your exit task should be at the bottom of each section of your notes. And next we'll move on to lesson 2.